Welcome back to the Forged Freedom Podcast. We're your hosts, Rob Elliott.
And Ed with him.
We're going to talk about regrets. In fact, we've labeled the episode Regret Jack, and that's because we don't want anyone to regret anything more than they already do, and to eliminate as many regrets as possible. You can go anywhere with these kind of regrets, right? I even write about it in my book, Ed, and I talk about the various types. But let's start with a silly one. You've got a couple things in your hand. You've got a thing that you want to keep and a thing you want to throw away. You walk to the trash can and you threw away what you wanted to keep.
That's where regret gives you an instant return, right? Because now you going into the garbage to get what it is you need, and you don't realize it until you walk to where you're going with the garbage in your hand. I've never done that, Rob. How about sending out an email right in the heat of the moment, getting emotional, getting fired up? So you send out a response, you go home, you lay down, you look at the ceiling, and you're like, I really should have waited a little bit before I sent that email. Or I want to respond to that email with a snarky remark, and I'm going to send it to just Rob. And instead, I realize I've hit reply all. Those are the kind of regrets I think about, Rob.
Yeah, and that's a little bit more serious for sure. And here's something that just kind of recently I observed, and it's somewhat serious. I'm a fan of Survivor sometimes, and we were actually watching when one of the players actually woke up and told his teammates about a dream he had where he got voted off the island with an idol in his pocket. And the funny thing is, the gentleman has been voted off many times with idols in his pocket. And now he's been given a dream that he better play an idol if he's in a situation. Well, he did get in the situation where he needed to play the idol, and he didn't, even with all the warnings. And that was a $2 million mistake. And it just is mind-blowing. And that's pretty serious as well.
Those are the worst kind, Rob. Those are the kind of regrets where you only have you to blame. His subconscious said, listen, don't do it again, man. Don't do it again. And it does it again. Well, we're talking about regrets. And you know, anytime we're looking for information, anytime we're trying to gather the absolute truth, where do we go, Rob? So we go to the internet and we look at the top 10, top 11 regrets. How about not being fully present or distracted by other stuff? Not being in the moment.
Happens all the time. People disengage for whatever reason. Yep.
I tell people, if you catch me drifting, bring me back, because I want to remember that I was here, right? How about neglecting your health?
Oh, major consequences there, right?
Spend that 30 years of working, and I'm going to enjoy my retirement. I know I have to, and then at the end of that 30 years, right? Or letting fear control decisions. That can happen on a daily basis. And now you go back, I wish I would have just, the feeling that you have having not taken that chance is always worse than taking that chance and looking a fool, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just listening to someone talk today about how much fear is a driver in people's decision making. They'd rather be comfortable and not take steps into unknown.
You're like, how does the world narrow down to one or two specific people in any given category, right? Those are the people that were willing to take the chance.
No fear, or at least they address the fear.
Right. Or face it. The fear is there. I think you're good to point that out. The fear is there. There's those that are going to step in and do it anyway. That's who moves forward. What about not spending time with your loved ones?
Oh yeah, I think that is such an impactful one. And oftentimes it's just a drippy drip thing that happens when people don't even realize how much time they are spending away from the family, and then the impact for that. And there's been many a song written about that. But I actually remember watching a video recently of a gentleman who was a very, very educated man. He went to Harvard for undergrad and Yale, got his doctorate, was a U.S. senator, became the president of the University of Florida, very accomplished. And Then, something happened to him, unfortunately. He became very sick. You might have heard about his story, Ben Sass, at the end of last year. He was told that he had about 90 days. Now, fortunately, he's been through some great medical experiments and treatments that have allowed him to expand that, and he's had some pretty good progress. But will he make it through the rest of the year? I don't know, but hope so. And during that video, he said a few things, and I actually have something I want to read because from him, I thought it was very important. As accomplished as he is, he had something to say. And let me just read. It says, in part, what a mistake in my 20s and 30s to be so focused on a lot of work ambition that I just made way too many stupid decisions to be on the road too many nights per month and per year. He goes on to say, if he had it to do it over again, he would be more intentional and be more ambitious at working on his home life. And I think that is an element of regret that so many people get when they're out of balance. And he's unfortunately having to face that in his 50s, or maybe fortunate that he got to it sooner. But a lot of people don't even face that until they get into their 90s, or late in their age, because they're so focused on work and they forget about the family or give up on them because they think it's too late.
And, I know I really liked your survivor illustration earlier, and that seems really foolish. Seems so silly that he had the answers, he knew the answers. His mind is telling him, make
Yeah.
sure you focus on this. And this gentleman right here, and I certainly am not being critical of him. I don't know him. I'm familiar with the story, but look at ours. Our generation started that phrase work life balance, right? And we
Yeah.
still don't follow it. We still push, we still drive, we still want to make it up that ladder or hit that goal. And if we're not careful, we're going to leave this life with that idol in our pocket.
Ooh, I like it. Leaving the world with the idol in your pocket. I tell you what, from our faith perspective, maybe we shouldn't have any idols at all. That's a good call out.
You're exactly right.
But but I tell you what, it is certainly a challenge to have regrets, and one of our goals is to make better decisions so we have fewer regrets. And I hope that we can teach a few things, or at least bring to the attention a few things to anybody who's watching this, whether they're an emerging leader or whether they're somebody who's been a leader for a long time. And we focus on those leaders because they have a large imprint on people, and we want to make sure that as many people as possible can have the best outcomes. So how do we avoid these types of regrets? I think that's what we can learn as we move into the forge. And we've talked about regret and how serious it can be and how silly it can be, but the real question is, how do we avoid regret? You have to have clarity on what you're doing, what you're trying to accomplish. Then you're able to move with confidence. How do you get clarity? Develop a vision for your life, a vision for your project, a vision for your career. You can gain the clarity that is needed to make the best decisions for not just now, but for the future. And so that you will minimize that regret and maybe avoid a whole bunch of regrets. And how do you end up getting the mission and vision that you want for your life? You got to tell a story.
So, storytelling is my favorite thing. I like to hear a good story, and I love to share a good story. I've learned over the years that my definition of good story might not be the same as others. I think first we clarify regret, right? Regret is standing in one position and looking back, either wishing that we had done something differently or we had done something at all, right? Wish I would have done that. I wish I would have done that. I think what causes most of that regret is we didn't know what we wanted to do to begin with. One of the key things in our story is we're writing it. There's a lot of other influences, but if we know the storyline, if we know where we want to go, that'll help prevent a lot of the looking back and thinking, I wish I hadn't done that.
Now, I think the piece about building out the story, I see it as you writing your story for how you want the end of life to look. That is the ultimate piece that I talk about. And that's because if you know what it looks like at the end, you can write near the end and you can write near the middle or in the middle. And I know from a reality standpoint, trying to think about the future is a challenge. There is a survey that we just looked at where many people talk about how they can look down like a month from now. And like 60% of the people said, sure, I can do that. That's not a problem. But then you move that out to maybe a year, that drops to 26%. And if you go to 3 years, I mean, it's 13%. So I realize asking people to do what I'm saying right now, which is if you're 30 years old, what does it look like to be, what does life look like when you hit 70? That's a huge challenge. And I don't want to say it's easy. Even for myself, I would talk about this stuff. Sometimes I'm like, what is it going to look like? That just means what, Ed? You've got to work on.
Just like anything else you want, Rob, we've got to apply an effort to it. We're not going to have the time. You're not, especially you're a young person, new family, new job, new career. You're so hung up on what you're doing right now, you can't even imagine what it's going to look like in 7 years. One of the things I've learned in the business world is, I'm sure you have sat in a meeting and they're projecting things 30 years out. They're huge,
Yes.
sometimes unrealistic, but they're there. And that gives you something to look at and something to focus. When you're talking about your personal life, and I know we get into details as we move along, but we're looking at simple steps. Where do you want to live? What kind of climate do you want to live in? What does your family look like? What does your financial standing look like? But again, going back to your point, you have to do it on purpose.
Back to why do we do it on purpose? We're trying to get that clarity, and the clarity does what? It helps us to avoid or minimize regret. So many people in the end of life finally thinking about what was important, they didn't think about it while they were living, and they ended up regretting a large part of the things they did. And like the number one thing you mentioned earlier, it was the loss of family relationships. And we can't overstate how important that is, because in the end, we need people to be around us, and we need to be around people when they need us.
One of the points I've heard you make too is when you're looking at the future, oftentimes it requires a look back. You look back maybe at the last 5 or 10 years and see what you didn't want, what you didn't like, and what you need to change or how you can make that better. There is about a 6.5 year, my wife always corrects me, about a 6.5 year gap between my two sons. And I was able to watch as the second one came along, the changes in the first one and some of the things that I'd missed. And I was able to make some changes for my younger son to kind of offset that future move, if that makes sense. It also gave me some insight, and I tell people, you're their idol till you're 12, 13 years old. They start moving away. 15 years old, you're a dummy. 16 years old, they're trying to do their own thing. But I was able to see through my oldest son at 21, they come back. Now that helps you looking back, helped me look into the future with my younger son. It also helped me to recognize how to improve the relationship with my older son.
That's a phenomenal highlight there, because you used what we're asking people to do is to use the information you gain through experience. That also speaks to how you can do that for the job place. When you're working with individuals, you're going to have a lot of people with a lot of different needs and wants and attitudes and approaches and tones. And you've got to learn from all of them everything that you can so that you can talk to them individually, of course. But there's some commonalities in how people behave that helps you with the planning and how you can ask your people to step up. I mean, there's so many things you can learn just from that example. Thanks for sharing that for sure.
I'd like to circle back real quick to storytelling. And Rob, there's a phrase you taught me a few years ago that I really love. And it's what we're doing now, right? We're talking a lot at our age about a younger age, right? What we're trying to do is help people fast forward. You're writing your own story. Maybe you don't know what your future, what you want your future to look like. Man, I don't know what it's going to be at 70, but you know somebody that you would like to emulate. And if you don't, you definitely know somebody that you don't want to be like, right? And use those to help you. The same thing with all of these steps that we're talking about. Share your story, pull in their story so that you can gain some insight, and then you apply it. Now you're writing your story, right? You're just using that fast forward button. There's no, if they've already been through it, they're doing it, and it's what you want to emulate. Find out some of the steps that they went through, help you push that fast forward button.
You and I have talked about that before because it's not necessarily that people won't go through the challenges that they will face. It's that they will actually have the tools available so they don't waste as much time. And that's the fast forwarding you're talking about. They're not wasting so much time trying to muddle through it. If they will actually just think through it, look at other people as examples, good or bad, and then make decisions based on that information. And I think that's a great thing to highlight. And in fact, when you think about that, it makes me wonder, how does faith play into this whole future, looking into the future, writing your story, making a story, the vision that says life's going to look like this? How does faith help you write that story?
I don't know how you could write it without it. I'm going to paraphrase Kierkegaard, even if I can't pronounce his name correctly. But you're basically living, everything that you're doing is rolling the dice on that split second between the time you take your last breath and where you're going to take your next breath, right? We look at it with a really strong Christian perspective, understandably. That's not where everybody comes from. They just need to know that it takes the same amount of faith to live that life, right? You have to know what you believe if you're trying to shape your current life or looking at your future.
There are a lot of times when people, and we've talked about this, different types of faith. Sometimes the faith in just a bridge will work, right? You believe it works because you've seen people drive across it, you've driven across it, and you know it will sustain, or it should sustain you. You believe it will. And the belief in what is important is what's going to help you get there. And we hope that faith has some great meaning to you, but even if it doesn't, you can take the principles and apply them in the same way to build out that future. That's a great way to call that out.
I do want to point out that it takes a guy my size a lot more faith to sit in the same chair that a guy your size fits in. I just want to make that point, Rob.
Does it take somebody like me to have faith that chair is still going to hold me up after you get up?
No,
I don't know if I should say
it's a
that.
good thing you're always 2 steps ahead of me. You don't have to worry about that.
The other segment we like to talk about in the forward is basically your vision. What am I doing here? What am I trying to accomplish? What is the project? What is my career? What does my family life look like? Those are purposes. Everything you do should have purpose and tie back into your major goals, your major vision, and what life should look like so that you have fewer regrets.
And then you go back to that clarity again, Rob. You go back to a clear purpose, right? Not to oversimplify it, but as a child, summertime, you have no idea what's going to happen the next day. You're just going to get up and wing it. You might lay around a little bit longer. mom and dad are going to take you to Disneyland on Thursday, suddenly you've got a focus, right? You've got a purpose to jump up. You've got a reason and a drive to get up and move because you've got a purpose.
I was listening to someone today on a podcast talking about purpose. A lot of people use, are you hungry for it? Basically, do you have a want and how bad is that want? And the discussion was, if you think you want something, but you really aren't moving toward it, you have to reassess how much you think you want that. Is it truly something or is it just a nice thing to have? Because if you really want it, you have to be hungry enough to do the work for it. You have to get up, you have to get ready, you have to prepare, and then you have to do it all over again and again and again. If you can enjoy the things that you're trying to accomplish, and if those are a lot of fun, that just adds to the purpose, and it makes it worthwhile. And perhaps that's something to think about, is if what you're trying after isn't fun, maybe it's not really the thing you should be going after. Now, not to say everything will be fun all the time, but in the end, is it really what you want to accomplish?
And you mentioned the larger purpose, and then I guess sub purposes is maybe for a lack of better words, right? If you have that clear, larger purpose, sure, you're going to have to go through a few things down here, but you still got that goal ahead. You've still got what you're driving for. And you mentioned hunger, and I know you can't tell, but I've been on a lot of diets over the years. But one of my favorite things about intermittent fasting is when you go to bed hungry, and you know that you can get what you can eat after this amount of time, after 4 o'clock in the morning, you might have a desire in the past to sleep until 5. But if I can eat at 4, now I've got a hunger and a purpose to get up out of bed at 4 o'clock, right?
The physical purpose is a great example. I mean, that's where we get it from, right? We're hungry, so we get out of the cave and we go and we track down the meal of the day and we bring it home, whether it's physical or if it's more of a spiritual hunger or even a psychological desire or whatever the case may be. I think those are very, very important. Let's transition into the marketplace. So in the marketplace, and this is where some of the most important work is done. And what is the marketplace? Just for reminders that we're talking about the different places we are interacting with. One could be home. The other is work itself. You've got a job. You've got to go to the place of employment, and you're interacting with people. That could be customers. It could be co-workers, and then there might be places where you are a volunteer and you're spending time there, or you're just out in the park having a great time. So I think the point is, be aware of how your leadership is going to be on display. Two things that we're going to talk most about: the relationships you have in the marketplace and your stewardship within the marketplace.
When you're talking about that, and we spend a lot of time talking about the future, and remember that's where we're pulling back. When you're building that future, what you're doing now has an impact, the butterfly effect. And so when you take it to the marketplace, and that's why it's so important that you know what you believe. It's so important that what you believe, what you think, what you do all lines up. Your character unity.
Yes. And the character unity, right? Just to recall what that is from previous episodes, it's when you're thinking and speaking and acting all in unison, meaning what you say you believe is actually carried all the way from a thought all the way to the action. And you're very consistent. Now, will we always be consistent? I'm not going to say yes. I'm going to say that's something we would always want to strive for.
And I would say that once that unity is lined up, because people are always focusing, especially when you're in a leadership role, when you do have that outlier, it should be readily recognizable because that's not something they normally do. Why is that important? It might not have been as much when we were younger, right? But if say your goal is to be the president of the United States, not sure that's as amicable as it was when we were younger. What you do now, if it doesn't line up with what you're saying, what you're doing, what you're believing later, and that gets brought forward, now that's going to show others where you're at. So that's got an impact on your future. In your relationships, if you see having that large family, if you see having living your retirement with those that you love around you, you got to start it now. You've got to behave in a way now that reflects that in the future. Otherwise, it'll have an impact on that relationship. You can't say that I want to be a steadfast, virtuous husband, loyal to my wife, living buck wild now. They don't line up. And so that's what we're saying. I know we spent a lot of time on that future and why does it matter now in the marketplace? Because it's all a buildup, right? It's all a buildup. If your intention is to live that life, then you have to start living it now.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there because it does highlight. We've spent a lot of time talking about that future. Why does it all matter? Why do we talk about it? Because in the end, you've got to behave in such a way that you get what you want and don't have those regrets. And as a leader, people are looking at you as a father or as a husband. People are looking at you as the manager of your department. People are looking at you as maybe the president of your organization that you're leading. And they want to know, A, can they trust you? And we talked about that before. One of the biggest things the relationships are built off of is trust. And that's why if people look at your character and they can't trust you, you're gonna have a very difficult time making those relationships last a long time. And will people actually seek you out, or will they kind of avoid you? And that in itself could be a regret. And I think what's really cool to pull out here is that you're looking at the future based on your values, based on your beliefs, and then as we talked about with character unity, you're doing it in such a way you're creating consistency. And you know what? That all go back to the beginning. That all provides us the clarity that we know who we are. That identity of who am I? Who do people see me as? Am I thinking I'm one thing and acting another, or am I actually being what I'm trying to be? And so I think that's a really cool way to think about how that impacts relationships.
Again, attacking the regrets, and I shouldn't draw all parents into that. I can speak definitely for myself. There are things that I wanted to instill into my boys. There are things that I've taught them, and there are things maybe I didn't want them to do, right? And because I'm open, because probably I talk too much, they know a lot of my stories. And so they might be looking now and thinking, well, Dad, you did that stuff and you turned out all right. Dad, you didn't go to college and you did all right. Right. But it would have been so much easier if I didn't. So that's a huge regret, right? Because you're trying to teach them and you want them to be right. And then you're trying to get them to fast forward, but you can't use yourself as an example in that situation.
Well, sometimes we do use ourselves in the negative side to say
Yeah,
why we shouldn't do it.
that's
And
fair.
we
Not a
get,
good example, right?
yeah. And but the point of it is too is that it's a learning place so that the kids can say, yeah, well, Dad, you did it. You can say, yeah, but doesn't mean it was the right thing to do. I wasn't thinking through it like I'm saying from this side of the event. Now that I know better, I want you to be better than I was. I remember telling my son that one day I want you to be a better man than I am. And as a young kid, he was like, well, how could I ever do that? And I think uh, he's well on his way because I wanted the best for him, and now I think he's going to do that. And the reason we do that is we build those relationships and we build that trust because it is something that I've always wanted. I wanted a family that was long term part of who we're together, and not passerbyers or strangers or anything like that. I wanted a whole different vision for life for them, and it's great to see that coming together.
My youngest asked me the other day, he does a lot of very deep thinking, and I'm thankful that he brings that to us. But he asked me this out of the blue. He said, "Dad, being really down on himself, do you think I'll ever be as good a man as you?" And I said, "Son,
Wow.
you're already a better man than I am. He's doing things now that I wish I would have done then, building that future. It's he's looking for his life vision. He's looking for what it looks like for him in the end. And he's got a few key things in there, but he's already
Yeah.
so far ahead of where I was at his age. I think both of my sons are in a lot of ways.
And I think that's the best part is back to earlier when we were talking about helping people cross that bridge faster so that they don't have to muddle through. And we try to do that with our kids, but we also do that with people on our team. It's so funny when somebody comes up and says, "Man, I have no idea how to do this." And then you think, well, I know I've struggled with that. And you have a couple of choices. You could tell them outright how to do it, or you could just kind of point them down a path to see if they can figure it out. As a young leader, you're building relationships when you help people build themselves. They sometimes might not realize it, but when they do realize how much you help them figure things out, as we mentioned before, you really set the tone based on your answers, based on the way you guide them. You can treat them like idiots, or you can treat them like the geniuses they probably are, and let them make a great path on their own.
Especially training young leaders. And I honestly, that's my favorite thing. And I always say, I may not be a good leader, but I know what a good leader looks like, right? So I try to share
Yep.
those things with them. And as you're saying, the different ways that you teach them, I like to give them confidence. I like to give them the secrets that nobody told us. We have situations where you have to go to the field and react to something that's occurred. And
Yeah.
one of the first things I tell them when I get there, I heard a young supervisor say, "I have no idea what I'm doing." I said, "I'm going to tell you a secret. None of us do, because there's not a script for this, right? We just need to figure it out as we go, and we need to work together. And if somebody sees a better idea, move forward with that idea, right?" And I just got a little feedback from that today. I walked in on a conference that one of my leaders was having with his leaders, and that individual used an example of us being out there in that situation. We got out to that site and we're handling that situation and we're doing the job briefing. This young man had turned to another leader and was asking a question about the setup of where we were at. And
Mm.
I didn't realize I did it, but I know that I did after he repeated it. I stopped him and I asked, "Is anything that he has to say right now more important than the safety that we're talking about? Because if it is,
Mm.
let's talk to the whole group. Otherwise, let's bring it back and let's talk about this." And when he was giving feedback, again, not to me, but to the rest of the group, what he said that showed him is how important that was to me, that we're not going to have that anything else going on. We're going to discuss that, right? There are times that we have the discussion. You have a different idea. We don't come to an agreement. I know that I have a good belief that your idea is not going to work, but the end result isn't going to be harm. It isn't going to hurt you, but it's going to teach you a lesson. I might let you move forward with that just long enough to let you see for yourself that it isn't going to work. And
Yeah.
that's the situations that I know. More often than not, when they give that feedback or they give an idea or a better way, it works. So we move forward with it. So I love, to your point of teaching, do we let them learn the hard way, or do we let them skip a step and move to the next hard thing?
A little combination helps them develop themselves. You just pointing them in the right direction a lot of times will make all the difference instead of having somebody frustrated. But I do like the other thing that you just said there is, whether you realize it or not, you're setting up a culture of what you said was important. As the new leader in the area, actually, right? You are saying, this is what's important. When you come on here, this is the way we're going to approach it. And people pick up on that. And back to the point earlier, whether you realize it or not, when you're in the marketplace, people are watching, people are listening, and they're going to repeat. Hopefully, you don't regret what they repeat and what they reproduce.
When you're a leader, which at whatever level, you can come in as an example for safety, and we'll just use the simplest that everybody uses in any operational industry. We'll talk about personal protective equipment. We tell people the two things that we jump back and forth on. Number one is PPE, and the other is safety over everything else. And you could preach that, you could say that, you could teach that. And then when you get in that environment, the first time you don't wear it, you've set a new standard. The first time you usurp a safety step because you're trying to rush things along or hurry things up because we're in an on-time environment, now
Yeah.
you've set a new standard. Sure, you've said safety is over everything and PPE is the most important, but what I saw when I was out there was what's really important is the product. What's really important is the end result. And you can go back then and use as many words as you want, but they're not going to have any impact, or I say not as much impact
Yeah.
as what you did, right?
And there's only one way to correct that, right?
Just to do the right
Change
thing.
what you did and
Right.
do it right the next time.
That's exactly right.
Now, stewardship is very important. How we've talked about how you have stewardship over people, over tools, over equipment, over your time. And you've got to make sure that's not a segment of regret, especially doing something that can cause harm, something that can cause financial difficulties because, you did something with the money you shouldn't have done, or you lied about some things because you were trying to cover up stuff. Some of that's intentional, but some of the things that happen are, you didn't know, or you incidental, or you accidental, whatever, but you still have the responsibility to be the good steward. Similarly, when you're talking about the safety, you're talking about being a good steward over the employees there or their health, and maybe your own. And if customers are involved, if they could be impacted in some way, your stewardship is critical. Just imagine if someone, regardless who it is, whether it's an employee or a customer or client, they get injured because you didn't follow the protocols. Your stewardship has been called on the carpet there, and you are facing a lot of regret that could be a lifelong regret in many ways.
We're a steward over many things as a leader, but the most important and most valuable asset we have are our employees. The best way to not have regrets with those that you steward, with those that you're in charge of, is to set the example, give the instructions, and again, most important, you have to follow those. That's what I mean by setting the examples. I have a
Yeah.
supervisor who's also a really good friend of mine who uses the phrase servant leadership. And what you pour into them, what you invest into them, should reap benefits both to the company and to their family life.
Which brings into the point about when you're looking into your life vision, or you're looking into your 30-year plan, or you're looking into your 10-year plan, the elements of whatever you're over, whether it's the people or the process or whatever it is, need to be thought of and brought up. Here's our responsibility for taking care of this equipment. Here's a responsibility for replacing it. Here's the responsibility for building a new facility or a new store, or whatever it may be, to service the customer. Part of that visioning for yourself and for your organization is to look forward to what can happen if if sales are going well, or if clients have needs over here. How do we service them, and what is it that you need after that? Well, you need more leaders. Like if you're expanding, you have to have somebody now in charge of this new facility or this new process that's going on online or whatever the changes. And so as you're envisioning things, it's not just about your life. It is about the responsibilities you have as an organizational leader, you have as a manager on a team, and all those are really important part of the stewardship piece and making sure you don't, man, we should have planned for that. Oh, I didn't know Christmas was December 25th this year. No, it's, you know these things, right? Because you've got experience or you look down the road to figure out what might be on the way.
When we talk good stewardship or servant leadership, that doesn't always mean the nice guy. That doesn't always mean being
Mm,
the squishy supervisor. That
yeah,
involves a lot of courage from a lot of different angles. You've got to be willing to make the right decisions, though it might bother some. You also have to have the hard conversations, though they're uncomfortable. Because if you're going to be a good steward, sometimes there are tools that we need to maintain. Sometimes that maintenance might hurt a little bit, might take a little bit of work on your part, might take a little extra courage on your part. But if
yeah.
you're servicing it correctly, it'll be better and usable when you go to get it the next time.
Let's look at it this way. When you're looking at avoiding regrets and you're talking about the relationships, I think you have to ask yourself, is there anything that I am currently doing or have done that is putting the relationships that I have in jeopardy where I'm actually going to regret whatever statement I said, or maybe something you didn't do and you should have done? And then when it comes from a stewardship standpoint, is there anything that you're responsible for that you need to put your attention onto? Avoid the regrets in life, avoid the regrets at work, and wherever else you might be impacting the community.
My line of work, we tell everybody before you perform any task, do a risk assessment. Is this going to hurt me or is this going to hurt someone else? And going with what you just said, that's kind of a risk assessment, right?
Yeah.
Before I make this next move, is it something that I'm going to regret later? Is this something that I'm going to regret having done or not done, right? Just do a risk assessment on your character.
Yeah, I like what you said there. So I'm going to make up a new word. It was something I love to do. I'm going to call it a regret assessment. I think that's a way to look at the idea of the risk. And now, is there anything I'm going to regret doing that? I think that's phenomenal. So basically, to wrap up all the things that we've talked about today, I mean, we've really come to the point of there are things we do that we may regret. They may be silly, they may be dumb, they may be serious to the point where we regret them deeply at the end of our life. Let's look at ways to avoid that. And knowing that you have the tools of storytelling, story building your future by looking at what you want at the end of life and then knowing what your beliefs are, knowing what your values are, and then wrapping up that with character unity. Hopefully it's successful. And if it's not, you come back at it and you try it again. So treat the relationships you have and your responsibilities as vital. And all of that will help you minimize, maybe even eliminate a lot of regret that you might have had otherwise if you'll just take the time to think about your future, other people's future, the organization's future.
The only thing I'm going to add to that, Rob, because that's very well said, is that requires, again, effort and intentionality.
There are some forging actions that we want people to take away. Ask these 4 questions. Does my leadership or character display to myself and others that I believe in something more than today? Question 2. Why is this project or effort that I'm going to get accomplished going to get accomplished? 3. Is my how going to compromise any of my relationships? And 4, is it clear what responsible stewardship is for the resources for which I'm in charge? Now, the other thing to do, those are great questions to help prevent and assess And part of that analysis is to ask yourself another question. Is there something that you want to avoid going forward? And ask yourself why. Write it down. And then another part of that question is to ask, is there a missing character trait that you think you need to develop or work on to prevent any future regrets from occurring in that way? And then here's the big ask: share it with that trusted person. We mentioned that last time. You need to share this with someone that you trust.
I think if we follow those, it'll give us, first of all, an action moving forward, right?
Yep.
Actions, words without actions is entertainment. And it's clear that we're not entertained. I want to remind the group, tell your story, especially your future story.
Yeah.
Start telling it to yourself, then start sharing it with others. Some of us are struggling looking past our 20s and 30s, but we've got to look forward and see, what does my life look like in our 70s, our 80s, and our 90s.
That is Ford's Freedom for today. And as you know, this is a journey, not a quick fix. So this week, take one idea that sparks something within you and put it into practice. Please subscribe, and more importantly, please share this with other leaders who are looking to grow.
Remember, forging starts with the first strike.
Hammers up.